carbon dioxide stole Greta Thunberg's life. That's what we learned at the United Nations over the weekend. Carbon dioxide and those people who don't want to follow her agenda who don't follow it fast enough, they stole her life. They stole her childhood. So I got myself the book published by her parents, and I analyzed this book to understand where this is coming from. And this book is a confusing mix of eco-propaganda and also how her daughters were affected by mental illness. So this whole book was basically a bit of therapy for her mother. She wanted to write the stuff and publish it and get it off her chest. And I didn't read the book just to find some ammunition that I can fire at Greta and her mother. I'm not trying to troll her family. And the establishment hopes that her critics use mean trolling techniques, because that sort of criticism can then be brushed aside. So I don't even need any mean trolling to understand what's going on. And Greta's mother doesn't have any solutions. Yeah, her mother doesn't have any solutions for the rising problem of mental illness in children. And she also doesn't have any explanations where all this is coming from. So if Greta's mother, or if Greta herself, would start to talk about vaccine damage, and that maybe vaccine damage caused these problems for Greta and her sister, if that happened, Greta would be off the red carpet in a second. So her career would be over. And I really, really empathize with the parents, right? So my two children, my own two children, are not vaccinated, and they are in perfect health. They're in perfect health. And if I imagine that my children had these sort of mental illnesses, and that's absolutely scary to me. It's absolutely scary to me. But Greta's mother wants more state, more power to the state, more socialism, more regulation for children, more panic propaganda. And according to the book, she also supports vaccinations and psychiatric medications. And her family, the whole family, they also want to regulate me. They want to regulate my life. They want me to pay for their ideology. And they also want to regulate my children. And we've seen this in the United States. We've seen this in Germany now. More and more governments try forced vaccinations. So if they come after me, then of course it's my business and I have to respond. So it's actually her mother, it's actually Greta's mother, who is looking for ammunition everywhere to fire against people such as myself. Because in her ideology, all this evil in the world comes from men and male rational thoughts and what men have built. That's her explanation. And let's not forget, Greta was given a lot of power by the establishment, and she wants to wield that power. She wants to use that power to force the world according to her wishes. She wants to use that power against me, and she wants to use that power against my children. So that's why she can't play the little girl card anymore, and her supporters can't play the little girl card when she is being criticized. Right? She has all that power. She has more power than many politicians, most scientists, and even celebrities And this whole eco topic was more or less therapy for her and the entire family. Her mother wants more government, more socialism, less male rational reason, right? And capitalism and the destruction of the environment and CO2, all of that leads to stress, according to Greta's mother, and this stress causes more mental illness in children. Right. That's how she explains that. Have they looked into vaccine damage? Have they, seen something on the internet while they were looking for everything? Because that's in the book. They were looking for absolutely everything because these doctors couldn't give a clear answer for years. So did they look around? Did they find some vaccine criticism? Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. And so, Greta wants to end my freedoms. Greta wants to end the freedoms of my own two children. She wants to force me and my children to do things. She wants to re-educate me and my children according to her ideology. And of course, me and my children are supposed to pay for her ideology. So that's a lot of entitlement for a kid from Sweden that's never held a job, that's never raised any children, and you never really know what goes on inside of her head. She is, she's from a Western country. She's had a decent lifestyle apart from her mental illness, and but she is a firebrand radical, and she's just as much a radical as some Latino communist who's lost half of his family due to some right-wing dictator. A naturally occurring gas stole her childhood, she says, and that the world is not moving according to her wishes, or not fast enough according to her wishes, that took her childhood away. So she wants us to believe that she would prefer to be a normal kid doing meaningless things at a meaningless school, and she is sacrificing a lot right now to live the life of a star, a superstar, traveling the world, being on the biggest stages of the world. Even a normal teenager would become addicted and slightly delusional from all of this attention that she gets, and this illusion of power, or this loaned power that she has. But she isn't a normal teenager. Her climate mission is her therapy, and she said this herself. Even recently she repeated this. Before she started this school strike thing, she had no energy, no friends, she didn't talk to anybody, she sat alone at home with an eating disorder, and all of these problems are gone now because she's found a reason in life in a world that is superficial and seems sometimes meaningless. And we know by now that she has Asperger's, she has compulsive disorders or neurotic disorders, depression, or had eating disorders, and she was mute for a long time, and her sister also has severe mental problems. And so Asperger's oftentimes leads to this sort of black and white view that she regards as her biggest asset, and her mother regards as a special asset, as a gift. She sees things clearly, even though these things are way too complicated, even for most adults, because it involves not just climate, it involves the superpowers, it involves industry and economy and history, all these things that require a lot of reading. Years of reading, in fact, if not decades of reading. And so, fanaticism is a lot easier. I mean, whether or not you have Asperger's, or whether or not you have vaccine damage. But what happens when the climate cult doesn't need her any longer? When the attention that she's grown accustomed to is gone suddenly because different stars take her place, or maybe other topics like the economic crash or wars get all the attention. All these other topics become center stage, and people don't care that much anymore about carbon dioxide. So, what's going to happen to her? The climate cult did a real number on her. Apparently they didn't care that she was too young and that she has all these mental illnesses. If her mission wasn't climate, but if her mission was vaccine damage, if her mission was to teach people about vaccine damage, she wouldn't have had a career. If she talked about vaccine damage that might have caused her problems and the problems of her sister, there would be no red carpet. There would be no United Nations grand stage. No attention, nothing. She would be just little Greta with a blog or a YouTube channel, and she would have to fight the all-powerful pharmaceutical industry. And YouTube would probably delete her channel, and Facebook would probably delete her page because social media doesn't like criticism of the vaccine industry. So, the climate cult was her therapy, but what about all those other teenagers that suffer from neurological, psychological disorders? Not everybody can become a star. Not everybody can walk the big stage and have this grand mission in life and have this distraction from your own problems. And remember this, it's economic freedom. It's economic freedom. It's wealth through cheap energy. And it's also a broad economy that give us, it's these sort of things, economic freedom, that gives us a feeling of individual empowerment, taking the initiative. It gives us meaning, it gives us adventure, it gives us a feeling of control. So while Greta has her 15 minutes of fame and she uses all of this to as a therapy for herself, while that is going on, she is subverting the foundations of modern civilization. She is subverting the foundations of economic freedom. And by doing so, she is condemning other children to exactly those things she was running away from, feelings of powerlessness. The feeling of being powerless and the feeling of being meaningless. Right? The more this green dictatorship is being built, and the more our children are being indoctrinated in this green dictatorship, the more our children are going to feel that they don't have power and that they are meaningless. You can do all the propaganda you want. Ooh, we're all together and we're all doing this together, but it's a classic attribute of socialism that the individual means nothing, the collective means everything, and that has some very bad effects on the individual. So, when she traveled, when she did this famous trip to Davos, the Economic Forum, when she made that trip, she could have been protesting all kinds of things there. She could have been protesting the pharmaceutical industry. She could have been protesting vaccines. She could have told the world, I probably have vaccine damage, so has my sister. This sucks. Let's hold people accountable. Yeah, she wouldn't have met all those celebrities at Davos. She wouldn't have been let into the meeting. They would have shooed her away. They would have let her freeze in the snow. And the founder of these Davos conferences was a man called Klaus Schwab. He was made a Knight Commander of the Order of St. Michael and St. George by the Queen of England. This Mr. Schwab, or Schwab, is also in the steering committee of the Bilderberg conferences. And so, at Bilderberg in Davos, you get all these people from the Anglo-American Empire. And these powerful people, they also run the Green Movement. And so, I read the complete, entire book by her mother. Her parents, it's mostly the mother. And so, you hear about how Greta in the 5th grade started to cry all the time, and she stopped playing the piano, she stopped eating, she stopped talking. And the doctors were unsure what the problem was. And at some point, after losing more and more pounds of weight, the parents started screaming at her if she doesn't start eating soon, she was going to die. So, parents are screaming at her, and she gets a panic attack, and she starts screaming for 40 minutes. So, the psychiatrists threaten her, if you don't start eating, we're going to admit you to the clinic, and we're going to force feed you and tie you to the bed and all these things. And that's when Greta started eating, but very slowly and very, very slowly, and everything had to be perfect, and everything had to be very, very slow. And at this point, when it's about, when there's a problem with eating, when there's a problem with depression, there's all kinds of modern studies and modern ideas about therapy. There's nutrition. There is THC, there is CBD, there are all these substances, natural substances derived from cannabis or other plants. And these substances, they can encourage eating, they can have benefits, and we need more research on that. But there's no big money in cannabis. So instead, the parents agreed to give the daughter sertraline, an SSRI drug, a psychiatric drug, a mood stabilizer. The problem with this mood stabilizer is studies that were negative about this stuff were not published, or oftentimes not published, and studies that had something positive to say about this stuff were published. You can check this out on in a meta-study called Selective Publication of Antidepressant Trials and its Influence on Apparent Efficacy. So we don't even know if the stuff works that well, and it has a lot of negative side effects. But the parents, apparently, they trust the pharmaceutical industry. So, then you get the mobbing issue. Supposedly, Greta was the victim of extreme mobbing. She was beat up. She was lured into traps, and she was ambushed, and she was systematically shut out of the student circles. But then there's something really weird in the book. The book says that the school said that it was Greta's fault. Now, of course, we've heard or read lots of cases of mobbing, and when the schools they want to not admit any fault, or the schools want to be viewed as being in control of a situation like this, so schools tend to lie because they have to make their own superiors happy. So yes, mobbing is a huge problem, and if you're an unlucky kid and you have certain conditions, you might be, of course, the victim of some severe bullying. But in this book, the mother says, according to the school, other students were accusing Greta of things. What things? We don't know, because the mother doesn't tell us. She tells us some less dramatic stuff, but she mentions that there are some serious allegations against her daughter, and she doesn't want to name these serious allegations in the book. So we have to basically guess how much of this isolation was due to Greta and was due to these other children in school. So it's not that simple, that's what I'm trying to say. And Greta at some point said she doesn't want any friends because friends are children and all children are mean. Aren't children the ones that Greta wants to save and inspire? Isn't she working for the interests of the children out there, for the new generation? Or does she still hate other children because they're all mean? Is she one of those green people who dislike humans, like animals but not humans? Is she one of those people? Now in school, she watched a climate propaganda movie and she started crying, so just like other students. She stopped eating meat, which can cause all sorts of problems after a few years. I'm not going to get into that discussion right now, but it's a risk factor if she doesn't eat meat. I mean, even vegetarians and vegans will agree that you need to be very careful with your diet. You need all kinds of nutrients, but she had this eating disorder where she would only eat small quantities of very specific foods, always the same foods, not a lot of variety, not a lot of nutrition. So in her situation, it was way too risky to stop eating meat. So then she couldn't bear other children having fun, other children caring about clothing and smartphones. She hated that. Greta resented that. All these other mean children who have fun. And then the mother kept telling Greta that she was special, that she's kind of chosen, and she has these superhero powers. And that's exactly what Greta says, that her Asperger's gives her superpowers, or she views it as a superpower. And it can be dangerous if you teach your children that they are the chosen ones and they are the golden childs and that sort of thing, because children are egocentric. You know, that's just genetics. So during evolution, children had to be egocentric to survive, to get enough food and get enough attention, get enough protection. But what if this egocentric thinking gets out of control? I mean, normally your peers in school or other places, normally your peers are supposed to ground you in a way. Now, this is usually not done in a professional way, but that's the reason why you need friends at this critical age. They need to ground you. They need to give you something to compare yourself to, and to judge yourself, what you're good at, what you're not so good at, and what it takes to become good at something. So her surrounding was, her world was a bunch of therapists and her parents and the children in the Thunberg household. The children controlled the parents, basically. Not healthy. So, yeah, and also, as a teenager who didn't like school, what job would she have chosen? What career could she have chosen? How successful would she have been? So she hated what other people had. She maybe wanted to destroy what other people had, and this climate cult played into these feelings. So then the other daughter started having these meltdowns. The daughter couldn't bear certain sounds and noises. And that was a disaster. Meanwhile, Greta could only eat around her parents. Special food, prepared in a special way, nothing else. Nobody else could be present while she eats. And the sister, she couldn't bear any noises anymore. Then the neighbors were doing renovations, and that led to an epic meltdown. So the kid ended up in the emergency room and got medicated. And that's when the mother started to collapse. And the mother needed pharmaceutical drugs and psychiatric drugs. And anytime the parents wanted to set clear boundaries to the children, more epic meltdowns happened and more trips to the emergency room. So it's ultimately the children in power. And that's not healthy. That is totally not healthy. And then neurotic compulsions. She had to walk a certain way on, on the pavement, and the mother had to walk a certain way on the pavement. And so, constantly the mother writes that the male society is at fault, a lack of socialism is at fault, a lack of state control is at fault. And then, of course, the daughter started to become an eco-warrior, and that's when they had a distraction from all this mental illness, and that's when the whole family had a mission, and things were getting better, and of course the parents didn't want to risk this progress, and that's why they kept going and going and going and going. Not healthy, ladies and gentlemen. And that's really the story of Greta. That's really the story of Greta, and if you look into all these powerful circles, then you see that the higher you go, the more you have the same kind of people from the east or from the Western superpower, Democrats, Republicans, doesn't matter. It's all these people together that run the dirty industries or any important industry, and they also run the green movement. And that's something that little Greta might someday understand. But when she understands it and when she says it out loud, her career is over. All right, that's enough for this video. Please comment down below, tell us what you think, subscribe to this channel, and spread this on social media.